morning. Thank you for joining the discussion, The Use and Meaning of Color in Contemporary Indigenous Textile with Porfirio Gutierrez. I am Dana Rebecca Woods, costume designer and the co-chair of the CDG Diversity Committee. Welcome. I would like to acknowledge everyone that helped make this possible. Salvador Perez, CDG President, Brigida Romanoff, CDG Executive Director, the CDG Diversity, Education, and Sustainability Committees, Lucas Stemberger, Director of Photography, Jason Eberly, Editor, with a special thank you to Anel Broder, Costume Designer, Barbara Arajo, Illustrator, both of whom are CDG Diversity Committee members. We are going to begin with a studio tour visit, have remarks from Porfirio Gutierrez, and have question and answer period towards the end. Please put your questions in the chat. Without further ado, let's visit Maestro Porfirio's studio.
Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today. Please come walk with me my space. We'd love to show you a little bit about the process of making my textiles, the different elements that I've used, and how that relates to an ancestral tradition that dates back to at least 10,000 years of history. One of the most visual reference are the cochineal insect. What you see behind me here are cactus that are used to actually farm these insects. The insects are grown on these cactus. Each little dot that you see on the cactus, these are white little dots that you see here. They're a little white fuzzy thing that it looks like small pieces of cotton that's on the cactus. So inside that are the cochineal insect. What you see on my hands here are dehydrated insect that have been harvested a few months ago. And what I do here, or the purpose of these cactus, is to farm the color red. Cochineal insect has been used, is one of the oldest pigments used, or was used in Mexico. My ancestor was using this insect also for medicine. The doctors would prescribe them for different heart issues, but also when someone has a wound in their body, cochineal insect was an important element in the medicine. Of course, aside in the arts, but symbolically, the color red has been used in different rituals, such as burials. It has an association with the gods. It has an association with the blood. So insect are a scale insect, again, that breeds on prickly pear cactus, and it takes about 60 to 70,000 of them to create 1 pound of dye stuff. It takes about 1,000 or so leaves of cactus to make 1 kilo of dye stuff. So when it comes to handmade things, and especially when I think about my weavings, I think about the season imprint. I think about every time I'm harvesting of each element to create color, I'm also collecting a DNA of nature. Colors start to change with the environment, with climate change, how much water it received, is there a drought? That all affects the color. And each piece, in fact, represents a specific imprint of a season. Cochineal insect, it does require a grinding process. So use an ancestral technique, which is the grinding stone, or metate in Espanol. And this is just specifically to grind the color red here. This is just to understand the chemistry that's nestled within this cochineal insect, that's pH shifting. What I'm doing here, I just added a little bit of water. I believe that cochineal insect in its base form, it's a base. And once you start shifting the pH, you start to see more of an orange red. And in this case, I'm combining a calcium hydroxide. This is just a mineral that it's actually used to shift to a much more alkalinity environment. And that's how you start to shift in the color into a much more purple. And this is such a basic visual understanding of the chemistry. To infuse these colors into the yarn, it takes days or weeks, depending on the colors and the elements you're working with. On this other stone, I use it just specifically to grind indigo, or the color blue. Indigo is a plant, and this is a plant that has gone to a process where it's now turned into a pigment, and from here, then it's grind on a petate and a metate, and then from here, then it goes to a reduction process to create the color blues. So the other different elements that I use, you see here, are the different plants. Here's some samples of the different type of plants that I use to either create a one color specific, or to use as a base to expand the vocabulary of the color. There's a lot of chemistry and science nestled within the process itself. To give an example, what you see here, all these colors actually came from cochineal insect. And cochineal insect, since it's very sensitive to pH, you could start expanding the vocabulary of color by just over dyeing or layering colors, but at the same time creating a chemical reaction, and it's consequently also shifting the pH. And that's how you get an enormous variation of reds just from one element. Other elements plays an important role, such as mordant, additives, and so forth, to help expand that vocabulary. So in my career, 16 years of professional artist, collectively within my studio, we have been able to create 200 different shades of color, all from natural elements, such as, again, insect, plant, and a couple of fruits. When you think about textiles, there's so much could be learned and so much could be shared through the textiles throughout the world, and every corner of the world, and different tribes and native cultures. In my case, textiles, it is in our blood, it is in our tradition. I was born and raised in a family and a community that wove and continue to weave, and they have been for thousands of years. But in my family, in my parents, in my father's side, there's a lot of creativity, understanding around music, around ceremonial feather dancing, of course, weaving, farming as well. And my mother is also a dyer. She did a lot of dyeing when she was much younger, spinning, and of course, she has a lot of knowledge on traditional medicine. So this understanding of nature, the sacredness of nature, the understanding around divineness when it comes to nature, and the Zapotec worldview that nature's alive, I receive it from my parents, and so much of my work communicates with this kind of understanding, using the most ancestral tradition techniques, and these understandings, which are part of my cultural value, helps me to communicate in such a way that can speak to today's tradition and today's modernism and influences through diaspora. So much of my work, it's been informed by also modernism, modern culture. This is a great example of not only some of the colors that could be obtained from the cochineal insect, but it's a very traditional design that's inspired in one of the most important archaeological sites. This is in Oaxaca, Mexico, where I was born and raised. I wanted to honor those elements and those symbolism, but I wanted to do it in a way that yet communicates those understanding, but also very minimal, very simple, but at the same time, I wanted to be strong design. And I was really interested in creating a conversation around the color red itself. These are part of my functional work. What you're looking at here, this is some of the work that it could be used as maybe as rug or maybe as wall hanging. Some people put them on the table for a centerpiece, but mainly they're used as rugs. Historically, they were actually used as blankets for everyday use and for ceremonies. When I think about material itself, cultural materials, or in this case, my artist materials, really has to do with how these materials are actually attached to sacredness and divine and spiritual understanding of, again, color. In this case, the sheep, which is the predominantly materials that I use, wool. When I think of the wool itself, this is a great example of some of the colors that you get to see in just the natural sheep color. This is hand-spun yarn. And what you see here is a variety of different shades that naturally a sheep produces. So naturally, the sheep will not have a fine and solid color. It's going to have a little bit of variation. And you start to see this variation that's a little bit gray, then it goes to more clear white, into more beige color here. So it has a lot of depth and richness to it, which normally I don't actually, in fact, I don't remember actually dyeing these hand-spun yarn because they have such a characteristic to them. I just choose to just work with them, which is its natural form. And when I create a design, often I actually design around these materials. So if as far as understanding the process and working with nature, I really have to pay a lot of attention on the nature and its characteristic. So many of the designs, I have to think about some of the colors that the natural handspun produces, or some of the natural color that any plants would produce, and the variation of that might have in a dry season. Or in this case, I'm never going to be able to get one solid color out of the natural handspun. But in designs like this, which are these butterflies, helps to illustrate much better, help to honor these creatures, help to pay attention to the slowness, but also to the variation of nature itself. As human being, I am often like to impose on materials, like to impose on nature, but my cultural values is constantly helping me to understand my principles and pay attention to the material itself versus trying to have nature pay attention to me. Instead, just to bring this humble approach to the materials. So these butterflies are triangle. Traditionally, it's being used in a different way. What I'm doing here is sort of a way to take all these butterflies, traditional aspect of take them apart and then reposition them again to create a movement or maybe an aesthetic that could be expressed to a modern or contemporary Indigenous artist. And also it explains and engages how Indigenous people are communicating today in modern society. To make textiles, so much of the work, it's being conceived within sometimes an idea, and then it's then sketched by hand. So much of my more conceptual work that I actually, unfortunately, don't have a sample of some of my conceptual work here. But those work actually starts responding experiences like diaspora, experiences, borders, and what it means in this case for me to be a Native American living in 24th century in the United States. But to execute a functional work, or a rug as we often call them, first the sketching, and then obviously discussing the size, then dyeing the yarn for the weaving. As to actually to the technicality of to executing the piece once it's on the loom, what you see here, it's a tool that's called a loom, a floor loom, a walking loom. It's also another reference for it. A walking loom because it has a pedal, and this pedal is attached to a harness. These elements here, it's called the harness, and every time I step on one side of the pedal, the harness helps to open up the shed or to open up the string here, which are the warp. So that way I could then pass a color bobbin and then consequently start to building on the weaving or the design itself. Depending on the side of one weaving, it could take days or weeks and sometimes months. That's not obviously counting any dyeing process. So weaving, it is like my language. It is something that I have, that I've known, I guess, before I was born. It's something that we grew up doing. But it's now as a much more older and as an artist, it is a medium for me to communicate something that concerns me, something that interests me in life. And of course, aside from my functional work, aside for just making a beautiful rugs, it's also a medium, again, an artistic medium for me to create a conversation, a communication around.
Hello, and now I would like to give a warm welcome to Maestro Porfirio.
Channan, kachinadina ve bazonedius navalaste yutu. Reciban un cordial saludo de una comunidad ancestral, la nación Zapoteca. Please receive greetings from an ancestral nation, Zapotec people. Again, I was born and raised in a small community. It's called Teotitlán del Valle. Within that community, it is an ancestral community, an ancestral understanding around the understanding of the worldview of the Zapotec people. And so much of our history has been documented in ceramics. My ancestor did a lot of work when it comes to precious rocks. It comes to gold work. And so much of it could be also seen on the type of work that they did around colors. In the agriculture sectors, they spend a lot of time at developing that part of their culture, but also work with such as cochineal insect. 500 years ago, when the Spanish arrived, what is known as Oaxaca in Mexico, our lives began to be a syncretism that continues to honor where we came from as an ancestral people, but also these merging of especially Catholicism and other ways of understanding the world through the Spanish and what the Spanish brought to us. We continue to dance for our ancestors, for our community, and for our faith. We believe that when someone passes, the soul starts a journey from earthly world, underworld, into the spirit world. It lives in the spirit world and comes back and visits us during Dia de los Muertos. We burn incense, we put offerings on the altar, we use specific flowers just for that celebration. We believe when our ancestors come and visit, we believe that they're actually there with us and celebrating. That's where all the foods and that's where the incense, the lights, and even mezcal, it's important in our culture. My ancestor has been working with corn or the oldest remnants of domestication of a plant called teocintle in Oaxaca area. The remnants is 6,000 years ago. Today, millions and millions of people eat corn around the world. And of course, textiles has been used to not only protect ourselves, but also to communicate a social and also understanding of who we are as weavers, as culture, as um, an ancestral nation. I come from a family, of course, weavers, and because I was born and raised within this community, within this family, I'm automatically a weaver. But my father's side, musicians, ceremonial dancers. My mother's side, great farmers family, but also my mother's second generation of traditional medicine. But most importantly, from these people, I learned the understanding and the divineness and the sacredness of nature. I grew up hearing my parents say to please respect nature because the plants are alive just like us. To only take what you need, whether you're building your house, whether you're using medicine, plants for medicine. By the time I was growing up, natural dye tradition was already extinct. So I learned much about the properties of the plant as medicine and not so much as a color. My mother, she does a lot of her healing, of course, with plants, but also with water. We believe that water is a life and it's bringing its force and its divineness, but also its power through the rivers. We believe that there's a greater being or a spirit that cares for the water. So historically, there was offerings that was given to that spirit in order to being able to obtain water or to give thanks to having the access of water. Color is just a perception. Color, for me, it is a result. It is just a result of the deep relationship that I have been building with nature. Nature has its variation. It reacts because it is a life. It gives you different colors or different shades of the reds, or different shades of green, depending on how much water it received for the season or not enough water. We understand that the color also creates a variation if the side of the mountain where these plants are collected received a lot of shade or maybe received sun throughout the day. Cochineal insect itself, it is the main purpose, or as it is the main source of color red. In our culture, however, the color red itself continues to be used as a symbolic element. Women wears an enredo or a skirt like with the sash to participate in a different ceremony, specifically in procession. And of course, on this picture here, you could see the syncretism I was talking about earlier, that we continue to honor our ancestors and we continue to understand the color as sacredness and an important symbolic, but also this celebration is now an offering to saints. And this is where the syncretism is very visual. My ancestors understood, and they understood the importance of the cochineal insect for the color red, not only through the commodity aspect of it, but to the sacredness of these insects. I could imagine it had to take few generations in order to domesticate a wild insect that not modern science called Dactylopus coccus, E120, or carminic acid. Well, in Europe, the color red historically was a representation of wealth, status. It is a culture that dominates. It is a culture that expresses the power of these people that can afford the color reds themselves. The picture you see on the screen here, it illustrates how important was color red, but also the role that cochineal has played within these expression. Cochineal was introduced to the colonial period, and immediately the queen noticed the value of the color red, obviously way before cochineal insect, but also the opportunity to be able to create an economic for the country. And cochineal insect also was valued next to silver and gold. But it also created slavery to my ancestors, to the indigenous people of Oaxaca that because of the interest and because of the uses of cochineal insect, that created a forced slavery, and that created a non-health environment for the indigenous people. For me, cochineal insect, that is one of the most important reference when it comes to diaspora. For those of us that had experienced migration and has experienced the need of migrate for a different environment or different parts of the world for a better economic, but also diaspora, we could see it now that it's being forced also by climate change. And of course, historically, it's been inspired by, or not inspired, but it's been done because of violence and because war. And cochineal insect, in my culture, in my knowledge, it is the perfect example when I think about diaspora. The piece that you see here on your screen, it is my more conceptual work. These are non-functional pieces. And this particular work, it's a series. It's part of a series of work that I call Diaspora. And this is making a conversation around, or making a reference through the butterflies, monarch butterflies. It takes at least the first generation, or the first generation of the monarch butterflies spends winter in Michoacan, Mexico, or in Baja. It takes about 3 to 4 generations for them to go back home, northern United States, and in Canada. There's always the notion of coming back home, and for them, in order to save their species, they have to travel and they have to migrate. And their next generation knows and has this need, or the memory of their ancestors, knows that's the reference for them to go back home. But there's always the need to go back home. And those are some of the conversation I continue to have, and I continue to ask myself, or people continue to also ask me. As modern society, I could be seen as a migrant or an immigrant in this country. And for those of us that has experienced these diaspora, we often talk about, when would you go back home? Hey, cuando te vas para el terre, as we say it in Spanish. There's always this notion of going back home, or one day to be able to go back home. So there's the need to go back home. In parallel, I also make reference to the butterflies in our culture, this journey that the butterflies has to travel, or has to take earthly world, underworld, into the spirit world, and then comes back home to visit us. So there's always these needs of coming back home. But for me, as a Native American, I often ask those questions that, for me, I am actually home when I'm thinking about land base. This is the land of our ancestors, but it just happens now for a border to exist. I happen to get caught up on those borders that now Mexico and United States, which before it didn't exist. Our ancestors have continued to travel along the Americas for thousands and thousands of years. And maybe there's no need to go back home because I'm home. When I think about the actual construction of the work, I was thinking so much about what are the materials and technique that it's going, where these conversations is going to be lived in. So I continue to conversate, of course, around my traditional technique. What I did with these pieces is I basically wove one white canvas, and then I apply the color. I apply the color in a way to create movement. And then later, I then apply the design itself. And this technique that I use, it is non-traditional. This is a needle felting technique because I was looking for some relief. I was looking for some textures. And on this picture here, on the picture right to your right screen, that's where you're able to see the thickness of the design itself. But I was looking for create movement, at the same time create texture. Other works that has responded to this kind of conversation is a body of work that I started 2 years ago that's called Continuous Line. Continuous line in the art world, it means that when someone will make a drawing and from start to finish, the pencil will never, it's never left off the paper. I also think about continuous line cultures like mine, who is many times it's been questioned, is it authentic? Can a culture like mine using natural dye harvesting here where in Ventura, so much of the plants that I use grows here. So often people ask me, does your work continue to have the family tradition as it was and like they do in Oaxaca? I think society, today's modern society specifically, has a specific way of thinking of indigenous people that in many cases, it is folklorized. And in many cases, we forget how indigenous people are engaging with modern society today. I happened to came to this other side of the border, but my tradition did not stay on the other side. My head is my house. So my tradition, I carry it with them because it is part of our intellectual property and it's part of our traditional knowledge. And specifically, this type of work could be lived where the plant grows. I've learned so much from the plant and nature. There's a particular plant that's called yashi that grows tremendous amount. Of course, this is in Teotitlán in Oaxaca, where I was born and raised. But they grow tremendous an abundance here, especially in Ventura, where I live. That plant is used for medicine, but it's also used to create some green shades. And that plant, it reminds me so much of my place and time in history. My work could exist and could live where the plants are grown, but also the plant continued to remind me that I'm home. So the lines that you see on these pieces, continuous line pieces, those are the lines that makes the reference to the continuous line. So instead of me focusing on what are the limitations that migrants faces, and it could be countless. It starts from the language, the culture, and so forth. To me, this is just an opportunity to enrich my culture, to be able to educate and re-educate or remind people about, or remind society about tradition and culture and how it's alive today. This body of work has a embroidery and texture technique to them. They are framed. Some of these pieces, actually, this particular piece you see on the screen, it is shown in the United States Embassy in Mexico City, and the rest of the pieces are in a show in New York right now. But if we go back for a minute, cochineal insect, because of the color that they provide, has an association with blood, with mystic understanding and divineness understanding. So for me, as I said at the beginning of my lecture, color is just a result of this deep relationship. So many times and very common questions I get asked is what the colors means to you. What are the colors, because we're drawn by the perception of color. But to me, colors will not exist if in this case, or the color red for that matter, will not exist without the cochineal insect. So colors start from nature. That's where the color red starts from. So essentially what we're looking at here on your screen, that those are the color reds. But to me, the color reds, it is only possible through the understanding of farming these insects, how they behave, how vulnerable they are to the environment. They don't like, or their body does not like extreme humidity, extreme cold. In fact, some of these cochineal insects, I have them at home right now to protect them from the cold. Here where my studio is very close to the beach. So we get some really, evenings gets to be quite cold, or when my studio is closed, it gets kind of humid in here. So I had to take the cochinillas madres at home. The minute that I started infesting the new babies on the prickly pear cactus, I have to time what was the date that I did that. I have to constantly monitor them so the wild insect and their far cousins are not coming to invade their space. And also, I have to prepare the new leaves of prickly pear cactus so when the babies are starting to born, my new leaves are ready so that way I can infest the new babies and give the new babies a new home. The labor process of farming, harvesting the leaves, which is essentially their home and their food, that is not even counting into cleaning the cochineal insect and start grinding them. And from there, starting to dye the yarn, particular yarn. So it is not so much about me thinking of a nature, something that I own. I'm an owner of the nature. Instead, I think of nature I think of myself as an extension of nature. These are the basic philosophy and understanding of indigenous people around the world, that we never really think about nature as real estate. We think about nature as something that we're part of. So therefore there's such a deep respect and reverence to nature. And how you able to build that relationship with nature, in this case, to create color, that is what was going to be the result when it comes to creating color and when it comes to also using nature as your artist material. Again, within traditional knowledge, there's a lot of chemistry, there's a lot of scientific. It's nestled within just the color itself. And these are some of the techniques that I had to revitalize. 16 years ago, when I reestablished my studio or resume my art practice, I established a studio, first of all, in Oaxaca, involving family, community members, spinners, farmers as well. I spend a lot of time on researching, but also on experimenting. There is no document that I found throughout my research that gives me a recipe to create color. But I have been so very blessed to be able to have my parents, because they're the first generation in my family to experiment with natural dye, but they were very limited in what are the colors they could create. Metals in the pots, stainless steel, iron, and so forth, has such an important aspect or an important tools in the outcome of the color. Other series of work that I have created not only continue to honor and look into the aspect of the material, specifically the color red, but also in other objects like petate, which is a palm leaf mat that has been used specifically for the wedding ceremony. I'm really drawn to the movement of the materials itself. I'm really drawn to the design that just the different colors create with not really having to weave a specific design. These are a series of work that it combines wool, but also plant fiber. So it has a lot of texture to them. Other bodies of work that continue to remind the fine tradition of the Mexican Saltillo Sarape specifically. This is a wearing blanket that started through the syncretism when the Spanish arrived in Mexico. They started working with the indigenous people of teaching them some of the techniques from Europe, and in fact, some of the designs itself. But it's just a style of work that became such an important in the 17 and 1800s. And these are textiles that can only, at that point, there was only the Spanish was allowed to wear. But historically, these type of weaving or designs, for that matter, can never be, or historians are not able to track it back to Europe. So those are some of the designs that has been a deep inspiration for me. But yet they are expressed in such a contemporary or abstract ways. Another really important aspect when it comes to architectural, weaving is the only art form that could be referenced to an architectural. And this is one of the most important building now. It used to be one of the most important ceremonial site for my ancestor. This is what you see just right outside of Oaxaca City. And so much of the design you see on the walls are inspiration or has been an inspiration among the communities, especially my community within the textiles. So essentially, my functional work, which are the pieces you're now seeing on my screen, these are just functional work. I call them functional work because they've always been functional work. Historically, these were blankets for everyday use and for ceremony. Now they could be used as an area rug. Some people put them on the wall. Some people put them on a table. But the design overall continued to make reference to where I come from. In fact, my work, I think of it as a way to reinterpret traditional textiles. This is made out of agave, where the mezcal comes from the leaves of the agave. It's essentially wasted because the mezcal, it only uses the heart of the agave to make the juice. Chemical dyes was introduced in Mexico in late 1800s, and my community continued to make the changes. But I was really drawn on the natural and in the colors that was not found in natural dyes. But also in early 70s, wholesalers and tourism began to arrive in my community, and they saw a great appreciation on the textile that was made there. But also, business people saw an opportunity to create a business around the textiles. That's where the time and history where chemical dyes eliminate and depleted the traditional knowledge of natural dye, because this new market start to ask for cheaper and faster. How can a craft tradition be cheaper and faster? So that way the profit in many cases could be larger. So the last few people that continue to do traditional dyeing technique, their practice at that point became depleted. Chemical dyes took over. More repetitive design and faster making culture started at that point. So again, by the time I was growing up, this tradition was already extinct. So much for those of you that might have visited Oaxaca, you see so much of the culture and you see beautiful craft that continues to be made, specifically if you were to visit my community. So much of what you see there, it's driven by tourism. And that it's some of these things that it's often saw as a souvenir. So the community will often do a quick demonstration to show you how natural dye how they think natural dye is done. But in reality, every 99, maybe 95% of what it's made in the community is made out of chemical dyes. So when I think about sustainability, when I think about color around traditional knowledge, I think about my place in time and history, and by how any of these things could be my reference. It could be communicated to today's need, if we want to see it that way, when it comes to faster making, when it comes to the need of being more sustainable and being more respectful to nature. I think as a society, we obviously have lost tremendous touch with nature, and I think we are in danger as society. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you all for taking the time to join me. Thank you, Dana, and your team, everybody that has made this possible.
You're welcome. Thank you for such a lovely presentation. Absolutely fascinating, the things that you just spoke about. For anyone who has questions, please put them in the chat. And Anel is going to take over from here.
Thank you, Porfirio, so much for such a wonderful and enlightening conversation about
Thank you.
your work and color and all of it. You know, you talk so much about cochineal, and it seems like such an integral part and an influential element to your dyeing and to your work. But I'm curious, you know, you showed the indigo in the tour. Cochineal seems like such a primary ingredient, and you're able to shift it from a color perspective into a lot of different shades. Are there other primary ingredients that have that kind of versatility that you use? Or is it kind of, you use cochineal pretty broadly and get a bunch of these different shades because of that insect?
Cochineal insect, it is the primarily foundation of the colors that I work with. The second most important, I would say, when we're just thinking about colors, is indigo.
Right.
But all of them, all of the plants I work with, about 12 elements, they're all extremely important. I mentioned cochineal insect because of its chemical reaction when it comes to pH, but also the ability to expand the vocabulary of color. Cochineal insect is one of the most humble, I would say, insect. And when it comes to creating colors.
Great. Let's see. We have Morgan Androff asks, where do you source your fibers from? And where do you find the wool and the agave? Are those local or do you import them?
So when I think about my community, these are people that makes my studio possible to exist. I think of my studio also as a social enterprise. And reason being, it's because, and to answer your question, many of the fibers I get from a nearby community, a small community. This is in Oaxaca, that hand spins the yarn. The mill spin yarn, I get it from Estado de Mexico.
Okay.
But also because, again, when I think about community-wise, I am working with a couple, or I say a family of shepherds here in Ventura County, who I buy yarn from them. So it is really depends what are the project, what is it that I'm working with. But also it is important for me to do that and look at it beyond just how I could benefit, or how a particular collection of work that I'm trying to produce, how these different materials could help me to the end product. For me, it is also about what is community, how Indigenous people, when you think about community, what does that mean to Indigenous people today? Here in Ventura, this is my village. This is my community. So there's projects also that exist here that maybe don't have thousands of years of history, but they have the value that I do have. They have the respect to nature. And I think it's important to create a broader community. So it is, again, a reminder of this, how we're engaging today. So the agave itself, because of the big production of mezcal right now, they're creating a lot of waste. So I do get some of these, fiber from that, and to create some of the textiles that you've seen on the screen. So it depends what the project's called for, what are the materials I'm engaging with. Either the materials is it's obtained at the studio, or in Oaxaca, or is it here? And that's how those are the community, and those are my resources for the fibers.
And that sounds like that falls in line with your whole kind of your idea of working with nature, of like keeping things sustainable, only taking what you need, as well as like your story about the diaspora and like creating a new community and art going home and also making a new home. That sounds
yes, most definitely. Yes.
great. Let's see. Adam West wanted to ask, in the traditional Zapotec culture, are there connections to colors kind of in the way that we think about them, like green with envy, blue with sadness? You talked about red, but just otherwise.
So the ancient Mexico, there was actually a color that represents where the sun comes on, and this when the sun it's born in the morning. That's kind of how we think of it. The sun rising, right? There's a specific meaning to that part of and it could also make a reference to west, north, east, and so forth. But so much of reverence it's giving where the sun rises. To talk to the greater power, that's the first place we look at. And there's a representation when it comes to colors for the sunset. Obviously, there's so much of these has gotten lost through the colonial period, because obviously their main goal is to erase our memories and our knowledge and how we engage with nature. But there's definitely, to give an understanding, those are the kind of engagement we have when it comes to ancestral knowledge.
Is that connected to sunrise and sunset?
Absolutely. And when it comes to color itself, I actually was writing a little bit about this in my social media, because it just has how it's, I was just thinking that in Mesoamerica, in what it's now known as in the ancestral Mesoamerica, it was full of colors: building, clothing, murals, ceramics, sculptures, codices, and of course the human body itself. And it's a broad system of social communication was on full display, reflecting their prevailing conception of the world. So color itself mainly, and I think not just mainly, but the main principle of color, it was to communicate spirituality.
Right. And that connection to the divine.
And the connection to the divine. So it's not just seen as color. And those are, again, some of the most common questions. What are the colors means to you? Or what does the color means to me? I think in our modern society, we think of the color, just the aesthetic part of it. And that's just the perception we have. In my context, it goes beyond that.
Great. I had a question. I know that the designs that you use, especially like maybe in the functional pieces more so, are drawn from your ancestral designs and the traditional Zapotec designs. I'm wondering if you can speak to what some of those patterns and designs represent, and how you approach modernizing that language to create the conversation for the modern world.
Thank you, Anel, for that question. It is very interesting for me to find, and I'm going to make a good reference to when I was growing up in Oaxaca, being in an environment, and I was a shepherd for a few years. This is between like 8 years old to 10 years old. And growing up, seeing these designs that in the remnants of my ancestors in our small community, but also beyond, like Mitla, the picture I showed, Monte Alban, and remnants of our civilization, it's around us.
Mm-hmm. I
never really think of them because I was also really young. I never really think of them as being modernism of such a simplifies. Because the simplification of that. When I came here to United States, I was 18 years old, and I didn't particularly was looking for me to dive in or learn or make a career out of the arts. I was actually running away from the culture, and I was actually looking for other things. And mainly, of course, it's work, and it's something, needed economic opportunity to help my parents back home. So later on in life, I discovered that the work that the greater being has blessed my hand to do, and it's the work that I'm doing now. So I never think of it as my passion or my calling. It is just a blessing that the greater being has given my hands to do. And I'm expanding a little bit on this so that way I could illustrate a little bit better. And through the work I was doing at that point, after I had already resumed my art practice, my brains immediately start to, or not immediately, but naturally start to be gravitating in things that are uncommon around me. So my school, it was never an art school. It was never in a classroom to understand color or arts. I'm speaking now more in a Western approach to art. Instead, because I come from such an ancestral creativity, mind, and understanding, it was naturally, my brain was starting to see things that are, yes, unusual, and some of them were in architectural world, because I was doing construction work. So I started to see some of these homes, the uniqueness of how the sun comes into the home, the position where the architectural face the windows. So these are obviously not tract homes. These are homes that was well designed, but also these are done by creative minds. The color that I was used, the interior the interior objects, all these things, I started to really capture my attention. Which later on I found out that some of the people that made this culture, modernism, and specifically California modernism, some of the people that, or maybe one of the biggest, how do I say, tradition, or one of the biggest reference to this is Joseph Alberts and Annie Alberts. These are people that, was flooding the world from 1830s, World War II, coming from the Bauhaus, and settling in United States, and part of this modern culture or modernism, specifically in the architecture. But Joseph Alberts was spending a lot of times in Oaxaca, looking at my ancestors' work. In fact, in one of the quotes he wrote, he said, modernism has existed in Mexico for thousands of years. And so much of his work is referenced from my ancestors' work. Again, as well as his wife. So later on in life, I also, again, discovered their work and their role in modernism, but also that they were looking at my ancestors' work. Consequently, I was looking in their work. And naturally, because I'm really gravitate to minimalism, to modernism, because I am also influenced by today's culture. I am in such a more urban America. So my life here in Ventura has been the last 25 years. But I also go back home in Oaxaca, where tradition continues to be preserved and understand the lifestyle. It's different. The simplicity and the reverence of nature continue to exist in some of the older community members. So these quite interesting way of existing, going back to Oaxaca, coming back here. And even sometime I'm in Oaxaca for a month, I say, hey, it's time to go home. So I come to Ventura after a few months here, like, I think it's time to go back home. So these, you could think of it as complicated way of existing, but for me, this enriched way of existing has influenced my work tremendously. And that's why you see so much of my work. It obviously continued to drawn from my ancestors, but it's and expressed in a very interesting way because that's how I exist.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's interesting to see the influence passed back and forth over time, and the Bauhaus borrowing from your culture and you borrowing from them. It's a nice chat, if you will, back and forth over time and space. I'm not sure how much time we have, but I have maybe, hopefully, just like a quick question. How, from your perspective, can we stay connected to nature? How can we approach our work from a perspective that respects nature, respects our the space we take up, and how we approach? Just how what do you think? How do we stay connected to nature?
In my humble opinion, and I'm speaking from culture understanding, but also personal opinion, is that the first basic understanding, and I think the first modern society, the first biggest mistake happened, and I think that's where racism started, is once we start thinking of nature as something that we're the owners of. You could see it in real estate and the crisis of housing right now, right? Of course, there's a lot of human, there's a lot of us. We all need a place to live. And we all, I think, deserve the most basic thing in life, to have a home. But the minute that we start thinking of that home or that land as a real estate and absolutely commodity, now home becoming a luxury, a piece of land becoming unreachable. People are not even able to pay rents sometimes. So we think that we own nature. We show our wealth through our portfolios and through big ranch we own. I make this illustration because where I come from and my culture, again, I said it earlier, we think nature, we're just an extension of nature. We see nature as divine. I grew up understanding that I remember we used to throw rocks in the water. And my mom told us once that you're hurting water, you're hurting it by you throwing rocks in it. So there's this divineness to it. And I think modern society has forgotten those principles. Now there's a huge trend when it comes to natural dye, and we're thinking of sustainability. But really, if we were to all do natural dye, and if we're not have a base where we're growing our dye stuff, it is as bad as a problem.
Right.
So we are now starting to terrorize nature. And natural dye uses a lot of water. If you don't have these kind of principles, you think you're doing a favor, or you think you're helping nature by using natural dye, but you're creating a bigger problem by using a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
There's this such a reverence way approaching to this type of work. At least that's how I approach my work. To me, because this is my livelihood, if I don't sell one piece, I'm not able to feed my family. I'm not able to pay rent. I'm not able to buy more indigo, more cochineal, more yarn, more soap. But at the same time, the idea it's not for me to scale and make 100 a piece a month. The idea is for hopefully, and I'm really going against the odds here, for hopefully the world can understand and appreciate these better. And I appreciate handmade work and work that has principles when it comes to sustainability. Those are some of the things that those are some of the understandings I have around my work. Is yes, I need to sell pieces to survive. But if I sell those pieces and a respectable amount of money, well, that piece, it's going to take care of all these things that I just talked about. And that piece for you, that piece, it's going to be continue to live in your family to the next generation.
Right. And carry on those
traditions, because if you need an area rug for your living room, that area rug is going to last you and your children.
Right.
That's the quality of the work. And that's, to me, it's sustainability, making something that it's well made. It's contributing to nature. It's contributing to livelihood of people. And to me, that's sustainable. It's not just natural, but the economic sustainability, but the quality of the pieces. Some things that are made out of maybe plastic, if it's well made, to me, that's sustainable. But these fast turnaround and getting rid of things, and this notion of cheaper, that's what we want to buy cheap stuff. Right. Why don't we buy quality things and pay for what that's worth? And that's all you need for a long time.
Yeah. Well, to that end, actually, Terry Gordon was wondering, and I'm wondering, I'm sure we're all wondering, where are any of your pieces on exhibit? Are they in a gallery or showroom? And if we wanted to buy them, where could we?
Thank you so much for the question. My more conceptual work, it's, again, one piece, it's exhibited right now at the Smithsonian Arts and Industry Building. These are the diaspora pieces. Another one is at the Netherlands Museum, at the Textile Museum in the Netherlands. United States Embassy, Mexico City in New York. I have a few pieces there in gallery and museums. But beyond that, what's more accessible, it's my functional work. And those you could find in the pieces you saw on the film. It's actually, the film was just done a few days ago, so I still have those pieces. But otherwise, on my website, and I'll make sure and put a link to the chat if you guys are interested in supporting my work. I just put a link to my online store. Feel free to browse, and if you have any questions about any of the pieces, maybe some of the pieces you saw here on the film, I'm happy to send you images of them and the details of them. So yeah, on my online website, I put a link on the chat there. Please go and visit. And if you're interested in supporting these type of work, I deeply appreciate that.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's the time that we have. I'm definitely going to check out your website. And I think Dana might have a few more words to close us out.
Thank you, Anel. Thank you, Porfirio. What a wonderful question and answer period. I really enjoyed it. I hope everybody here who's still here enjoyed it as well. Thank you for joining us today. And please do check out Porfirio's website. The work is phenomenal. And now that we have the history behind it, I'm even more interested than I was when I first met him. Have a wonderful day, and look forward to talking to everybody again. Bye.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you. Bye, everyone.